This correlates to the question of what it means when we say that we are offended, in that I believe that the response that we're describing when we say that we are offended is more akin to sympathy than it is to empathy. When we see that another person has been wronged, another person has been harmed, we would not describe our response as being offended. At least not primarily so. We may say that we are offended in addition to other things. But certainly the most immediately pertinent of our reactions is not offense, but perhaps outrage, anger, sorrow, grief. The other relationship between a sympathetic response and our being offended is that the offense, this sense of offense, being offended, is more often in correlation to an abstract concept than it is to a person or an event. Offense seems almost our response towards perceived injury against that which cannot be injured. An idea, a principle, a concept. In a way, we could describe offense as an empathic response to an abstract, to that for which we have no natural empathic connection. This would certainly go a long way towards explaining its synergy, its similarity, and its interdependence with the sympathetic response, because so too is some degree of abstraction required. They are not one and the same, as at least the experiential component of being offended does not rely entirely on this abstraction. We do not imagine being offended. But we are offended on behalf of that which is in some degree contingent on our imagination, which is not to say it does not exist, but rather that it requires that same mode of abstract thinking in order to draw this thing to mind. Were we to regard these abstract ideas, those ideas against which injury we feel as offense, as purely external, as purely construct, then we would not have an offended response. Now, this is not a thing that I am advocating. I am not advocating that we regard these things purely as constructs, but rather trying to get to the heart of the problem. Why this, by and large, sympathetic reaction is in many ways experienced as an empathic one. Why it is in many ways experienced as an internal one, an immediate one. And the reason for this, I believe, is that these abstract ideas, to a large degree, form the apparati or building materials with which we create our conscious sense of identity, that view of ourselves with which we identify. We do not construct the actual self from these things, the actual I, the perceiver which cannot be perceived, that original point to which comprehension, apprehension, or even immediate sensory perception are presented. No, that is beyond our ability to construct. And when we talk of the I as being illusory or the I as being a construct, we're talking about this second-ordered perception, this myself that I see in the mirror, the thing that is I that I may regard. And this we certainly do construct, and certainly do using these abstract notions, perhaps moral principle, perhaps specific cultural rules, perhaps specific aesthetic affinities. We do construct the I that we regard, this abstract I, from these materials. In this way, when we perceive an action or a statement as threatening to those abstract materials, we may view it, we may experience it as an assault on ourselves. And here, again, we must be careful. We must be careful to recognize a distinction between perhaps an absolute I, or a non-I, or a no-I. We must recognize a distinction between that and this construct, this concept of I, which we build as a necessary reference, as a necessary thing to which we refer, so that we may regard ourselves, even through artifice, even through abstraction. That which we experience as assault on the I can only be assault on the construct. It is not possible for it to be an assault on the true self, if we consider that there is a true self. Because if we regard this self, this underlying self, this, if you will, a sub-self, if we consider that as true, as extant, then it is not a thing which we have constructed. And as it is not a thing which we have constructed, it is not a thing that is impacted by this perceived assault on the materials from which we would build such a thing. So, having said that, let us move on to the question of injury, of injurious language in communication. And here I'm going to grossly oversimplify communication, philosophy of language, theory of consciousness, so on and so forth. And you know what? I warned you at the outset that I was going to be skipping over a lot of the underlying principle for the sake of actually getting to the point in an uncharacteristically direct fashion. What is it that we seek in expression? Like I said, a lot of groundwork that we're going to be skipping over, and we're going to be pretending that a lot of the underlying or presupposed questions regarding all of this have already been answered. I'll speak to a few of the things that I know I personally seek in expression. Conversational, linguistic, literary, philosophical, logistical, even arithmetic, mathematical, for that matter, this entire channel. One of the things which I seek in expression is a statement of validation that my intuitive conclusion, that my intuitive realization that you are a conscious person with an inner complexity comparable to my own, and thus must be an internal complexity and internal experience which must be regarded as of comparable importance to my own. I seek in expression to have this conclusion mutually validated. That being, I seek feedback which indicates that this is a correct conclusion, and moreover, I seek feedback that indicates that you have recognized so as well. At an intuitive, even perhaps even a very distant level, that you too have recognized the same of me. In this way, I view expression, I view communication as a necessary mutual validation of our humanity.